It's very difficult to know where to begin here. I'm going to go, if I can, first to you, Salma Shah. You're a Muslim. We've heard what Sadiq Khan said. He doesn't feel safe, right, as a Muslim man, despite him having bodyguards. I wonder, from your point of view, and, other people of colour, what we've seen in the last week, how does it feel as you watch what's going on across our country?
I think it's really difficult for migrants, Muslims, people of colour, because you have this feeling always as if you don't quite belong. I mean, I'm British, I was born here, and, Nels, you may feel the same way, is that the idea that you can suddenly be scapegoated for something and it's really easy to do that, I think it does cut deep, and it's an emotional thing that cuts deep. I think what we have to remember, though, is that there is an ability for us to try and cross this divide and bridge this divide and try and talk to people about what they're feeling and whether actually scapegoating Muslims and migrants is the answer, because people are sort of living in prejudice through ignorance, right, and actually understanding some of the underlying issues that might be at the root cause of this, whether it be economic, whether it be social, and that kind of unrest that exists. But it's undeniable that there are lots of people and lots of communities that will feel under threat today.
I think one of the difficulties is that, last week, all this week and at the end of last week as well, when you see the scenes, the level of fear that everybody feels, and there's a feeling of not wanting to exacerbate anything. And addressing the issues, certainly the government has taken, the underlying issues, the government seems to have taken the position of calling out rioters, thugs, racists, not actually addressing any issues in their statements, presumably consciously because they don't want to give any legitimacy to this kind of behaviour.
I completely understand what the government said. I mean, I worked in the Home Office. So the fact that we are talking about restoring law and order, we are talking about people feeling safe in their communities, because let's not forget, these people's own communities are being trashed by the actions here. So it's not as if it helps them any. But I think that the Prime Minister needs to address those underlying issues. I think there is a consistency here around the places that we're seeing that are experiencing the brunt of the violence, whether that's, what we used to call the old Red Wall towns. And politically, we have known for a long time that these places, we used to call them left-behind towns in government parlance. Levelling up was an agenda. Theresa May talked about just about managing people. And so until we start tackling that, what we are going to see is repeats of this, whether it's 5 years or 10 years. It does not justify the violence. It does not justify the aggression. But if we're going to tackle it, we need to start looking at those issues.
Now, is that the case? One of the things that felt very uplifting was seeing the anti-racism demonstrations on where, there's a sea of millions that sort of came out to say, not in my name, of all colours, creeds and religions. Did that bring you any comfort?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the Britain it's the Britain I expected to see. It's Britain at its best. It's Britain that I think should celebrate. Once we get beyond Saturday, we're expecting another where there might potentially be another flare-up of the violence. And I think that this Sunday or so should be almost like a V-Day for decent, upstanding. A modern multicultural Britain. It should be a day of celebration. Invite your neighbour around, invite people around, get out the flags, get out the bunts and get out anything and celebrate it. This is your victory against a very, very serious, dark period in our history, because it is British history in real time. Can I just point out a bit, to go a little bit further what Salma pointed out? I completely agree more. We have to address the underlying issues. And I call this ending the drip. Ending the drip. The drip stands D-R-I-P. Drip stands for the demonisation of immigrants, racism, inequality and poverty. The drip. We have to address those four factors, because underlying those four factors those four factors are what are driving these riots, essentially, because it becomes so much easier to view your neighbour, to view somebody who you have so much in common with, as somebody who's actually robbing you or somebody who's really exploiting you or somebody who's a threat to you.
Taking what's yours.
When you have those underlying factors there, and so if somebody wakes up in the morning and they're seeing in the newspapers or so, or certain television channels, and they're reading hatred and demonisation of immigrants day in, day out, it boils up. Same thing as racism, same thing as inequality and poverty. If we can end the drip, the DRIP, the drip, we'll find ourselves in a much better place. That's the only way to end the riots in the long term.
Where does that information, come from? Bearing in mind, what's happening online. We have Elon Musk, I'm not going to repeat it here, posting fake news on his own platform, albeit withdrawing it in one particular instance. But 2 million people...
He deleted it. He didn't say, I got this wrong.
And 2 million people had seen it at that point. Clearly, the Online Safety Act is not fit for purpose. They haven't even worked out what the regulations are.
Well, I don't know. Hold on a second. So, I wrote the first draft of the Online Safety Act in 2017. I wrote the white paper. I was part of the team that wrote the white paper in the Home Office. Yeah. The Online Safety Act has only come into effect, and it's not even in effect yet. Yeah. It only passed legislation in wash-up in May, when the election was called. Ofcom, the governing body, the regulator, is now implementing that code of conduct. We cannot say at this point that it is not fit for purpose because it has not been tested yet. So let's not put the cart before the horse.
How long does that take?
It takes a while, and that's the reality of legislation and regulation.
I just point something out. I am very concerned about the Online Safety Act. I'm not here to butcher your work in the slightest bit. I admire everything you do.
Well,
but I must point out...
it was a long time ago.
I must point out here that the policing of the internet, of speech on the internet, is something that really concerns me.
I agree.
Because I spent yesterday, for example, in court. I'm not a lawyer. I've not done as much as half an hour of a GCSE in law or so whatsoever. But I have to... A lot of young people keep contacting me, and please keep doing so, because they keep finding themselves falling afoul of something like the Malicious Communications Act or the Communications Act, and now probably the Online Safety Act. For example, and I'm just going to give the facts of the case I was in court for yesterday to support a young lady. She's a young lady who has been charged with using the N-word on Twitter. She happens to be a black lady. So essentially, she was using what's effectively slang for her. Common parlance for her, slang for her, and some ageing police officer who has no understanding of it. Right. Well, let's not prejudice, let's leave it at that too. But it's...
So I've got to come back to you, Salva. I mean, I've also read the Online Safety Act. I read the white paper. I think it was very important. It's very difficult legislation. You're trying to balance. competing rights. I get all that. Freedom of speech versus safety. Very difficult. But
and privacy.
And privacy, and all the things you're talking about. But hang on a second. I mean, it doesn't take long to work out, to pass through and to implement the fines, for example, that should be levied against online platforms when they clearly and unequivocally disseminate disinformation.
So, yes. So
why hasn't that been done?
But you have to go through a process. So that is not yet active. We are still going through the process of creating the compliance and the consultation. It's boringly technical, but that's what we're doing. And then when Ofcom does finally consult on the final parts of the legislation, it will implement that and it will have the ability to fine. But what my point is that we cannot say at this point that it's not fit for purpose because it hasn't done what it needs to do yet. Yes, it's slow. Yes, it's clunky. That's just, I'm afraid, the nature of government.
But, Salma, so we're looking at online safety and the owners of these tech companies and social media. These are the new masters of the universe. Elon Musk has more money than there's probably rice on Earth right now. So the question I would then have for you... I'm not of the belief that fining people, such as Elon Musk, for example, will actually change much because you can afford whatever fine you're throwing at him.
It's only up to 18%, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's nothing to him.
So for him, that's
nothing.
But it'll hit the company, and consistent fines at that point, if they are found to break the law, will have an impact. But it's not the point of saying... Here's what I want to say about this, about the free speech argument and online safety. One of the things that has been more problematic, in my view, is not about just people expressing their opinion, because you need to out that. You need to understand where people are coming from. It's actually mainstream politicians who have been talking about this that are not fringe, in the way that Conservative, Labour have all leaned in over the last decade or more into that kind of language that actually does impact migrants and migration.
Like who? So Mel Stride blames Nigel Farage squarely. Do you?
I think that that whole language, whether it be Nigel Farage, whether it be Conservatives on migration policy, whether it be Gordon Brown in 2008 talking about British jobs for British workers, I think this has been a consistent theme for a long time.
Well, on this programme, and then he went on to on other media, Robert Jenrick talked about the fact that he believed that if somebody is caught saying Ali Akbar, then they should be arrested immediately by police.
Yeah.
Now...
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. That's absurd.
Now, contextually, you could imagine... And this also points to, I think, of a lack of understanding, which doesn't help, does it? Because contextually, if somebody was perhaps standing outside a synagogue in a threatening manner, yes, but then maybe whatever they said at that point. So that becomes very worrying. This is somebody who's the bookie's favourite for the leader of the Conservative Party. You're a Conservative Party. What do you feel about that use of language in this very week?
Yeah, see, I think that is precisely what I'm talking about mainstream politicians thinking that they are going to get ahead by appealing to a very sort of extreme view. And I think it's so unfair. I think it's quite ignorant to have said what he said.
Well, I mean, you could remove the word quite, I think, in front of that.
No, it's possibly being a bit generous to him.
Yeah,
yes.
over-generous.
I was very surprised.
And for people that don't know, it's part of a prayer, isn't it?
Allahu Akbar just means God is great.
God is great.
But the context, he was... And listen, I don't want to speak for what was... Well, I don't care. You know, a moronic thing to say, an unsafe thing to say, and especially against the current backdrop, a dangerous thing to say. I think he was talking about groups using that language alongside carrying dangerous weapons. Only he chose... He
didn't actually say
No, he
that,
didn't.
though.
And as a politician, he has a higher responsibility and should be held to a higher account right now.
He should be, yeah, absolutely. I was really surprised. As a whole former immigration minister, one of the potential frontrunners to lead the Conservative Party, I was really surprised they didn't really know the basics of just Muslim prayer, essentially. But the same way in which if somebody was running around with a machete screaming, Jesus is king or so, I'd feel the exact same way about it. That's a threat.
It's the behaviour,
It's the behaviour.
Not...
But just saying that God is great or so, it was surprising.
You know, but that's not the underlying tension here. Let's call it, you know, what it is.
He's trying to bid to an to potentially Islamophobic membership base to improve his...
One of the things you were talking about before now is the fact that, you know, the police will show up at the door of people that might have posted online, right?
Yep.
And there's police resources that are deployed for that. Similarly, here, we've had a very quick response to those thugs that have shown up to riot, right? I mean, I have to say, you know, my background in criminal law, other than the riots back in 2011, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I've never seen something so quick, right? Within a few days, 3-year sentences handed out. In most criminal cases nowadays, it takes about 2 years from the moment you're arrested till the end of a case. That includes rapes, that includes all sorts of offences. Now, to some extent, you think about that. Police resources being deployed to show up at your door if you've posted something unfortunate. You know, victims of sexual violence. Now, to some extent, people look and see, look how quickly the police and criminal justice can react when they want to. But when it comes to other offences, where are they?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Look, I've dealt with young people of very good character, recently graduated students or so, for example, who have had their doors literally kicked in for posting a silly meme on Twitter, for the wrong emoji, for that sort of stuff. So I'm very, very concerned about this. I'm super concerned about this. I think the policing of Twitter, the policing of speech on Twitter or so, seems to have gone crazy. The Director of Public Prosecutions said something that really worried me. He said that they have, and I know this to be a fact, they have police officers scouring through Twitter looking for offensive things and then finding people.
Isn't that because the Act hasn't come in, though, Sam? Or will they not have a quicker way of doing that once it's in? It shouldn't be necessary under the Act.
I wouldn't understand why they were looking for offensive things. They can only act on crime when it's reported in order to investigate it. So there shouldn't be a reason why they're scouring social media if that's the case.
I just want to point out, too, just something about the speed. I think the speed of arrest also is necessary to get the knuckleheads off the actual street so they can't keep reoffending.
And make the people everywhere feel safer.
But what we're seeing is a massive discrepancy between the type of sentencings we were seeing in 2011 versus what we're seeing now. In 2011, a person, I believe it was a lady, was sentenced to 16 months inside for stealing a, quote, lick of ice cream. Somebody else was sentenced to 6 months inside, a student, a recent graduate of good character, according to the Telegraph, for stealing a £3.50p case of mineral water from Lidl. I don't know if it was burning or not. So we're seeing the type of sentences that were thrown out in 2011 were extreme. And, of course, it was, we all know who the director of public prosecution at the time was a gentleman called Keir Starmer, who's now the Prime Minister. So to see that there's discernible a lot more leniency of sentencing might speak to the fallacy of the idea of two-tier care or two-tier criming or so. Or it might speak to the fact that the two-tier swings in the other direction.
Well, that's the point, Salma, isn't it? I mean, this two-tier care thing, which has now become part of a Twitter meme, right, is part of this discussion that when it comes to the rioters, the police can act, right, and they will. But when it comes to other offences, other communities perhaps showing up to riot, other people with different political points of view to express, lots of people out there look at that and they say, where were the police in those circumstances?
Listen,
where were the 3-year sentences?
Let me come back to where we started, which is underlying issues. You pointed out something really important, which is there are other serious crimes that languish in terms of investigation and conviction and everything else. And then you have this situation and the full force of the law is felt. So it does feel like it's unequal. That is an underlying issue that needs to be addressed. Adjacent to that is the fact that actually we're losing trust in organisations like the police, in our institutions. And restoring that is not an easy job, that is not an overnight job. But restoring that is when you're going to get rid of this idea of two-tier care.
Right. Now, you say that it's important now to have this conversation. I think everybody would agree with that. For a long time, people in the blue wall where you're from want to be able to have these Red Wall, excuse me, Red Wall now. Want to have these challenging...
Red Wall, and then it went blue, and now it's gone back, hasn't it?
Right. They want to have these challenging conversations safely, right, without being called racist. And by the way, that includes people of colour, people perhaps who voted Reform, for instance, where for them immigration is the significant issue. It's a challenging conversation. How do we make the case? How do you have that conversation about immigration in a way that enables people to feel safe, to be compassionately listened to, which doesn't result in the type of thuggery that we've seen on the street?
And fear from those from communities for their lives, as we've heard this week.
Yeah, I mean, that is the sort of critical question, isn't it? And if we'd been able to do that well, we wouldn't be seeing the scenes that we have seen so far. So I don't have the answer, but what I think is important is that on platforms like this, we're able to have that discussion, that we're able to ask questions, that people don't rush to judgment in the same way that people don't rush to judgment about immigrants. We should not rush to judgment about some of the motivations of people who are out there rioting. As wrong as it is, and it is wrong, we actually do need to understand it. But it's about being able to have that conversation and being able to say to people, I know you think this is about immigration, but let's look at it in a different way.
Lots of people that are out there rioting, they're not there for immigration. They're thugs.
Yeah. Sure.
Why should why should any other decent taxpayer, the great British people who are out there standing shoulder to shoulder with minority communities the other day, saying this is who Britain is, why should they have to get into the minds of people who are straightforward thugs? Why should they get to set the agenda for this discussion?
Because there are some thugs and there are other people who are not, who are ignorant. So, and ignorance is not ignorance by itself can lead to prejudice, but it's not a reason to dislike someone. It's a reason to reach out and say, if we don't tackle this now, if we don't start having those conversations, then in another year's time, in 5 years, in 10 years, when is this going to rear its head again? This is not a solution.
You see, I disagree. I disagree that we don't have a conversation on immigration. It's the never-ending conversation we have. It's in our papers every single day. It's on our radio shows. It's on these platforms.
Is that a conversation that Starmer's talking about?
No, it is a conversation.
Or is that demonising?
Yeah, exactly.
No, to a certain degree, you're correct, but that's become the conversation. If you look at our democracy in Britain also, notionally, is centuries old. The first time we ever had a Prime Minister's debate, head-to-head Prime Minister, potential Prime Minister's debate, was in 2010. The first question that was asked, ever, was on immigration. It's something that's a consistent in our theme. From Brexit to every Prime Minister's debate, it's a prominent question that we actually discuss. The issue is that we are not having the conversation about it. We're often just having the demonisation. And I say, that it's time for us to actually, yes, have a conversation, but to really elevate and express the benefit, how this is benefiting our society. Immigration has been a blessing unto Britain. That Britain is a better place for it. It's a stronger place for it. It's a stronger economy. And where there are failures and failings, I must be very clear too that when we look at some stats or so, we might say, OK, it's brought down GDP per capita. That's a snapshot of it at a particular moment. Things rapidly change. Right. People improve their prospects. People move in. They intermarry. They do all sorts of things. And on Sunday, hopefully, we're all going to celebrate immigration and have a great victory parade for what happened on Wednesday.
Right. This is a conversation about, fear and, dehumanisation, right? But at the same time, what you say is it's an important chance now for a discussion to take place.
Look, I say this advisedly because I'm from the Muslim faith. Yeah. My family still live in some of the areas that have been targeted by protests. I worry about them. Yeah. My community is being targeted. Right. And I say this because I know that this is not going to go away unless we have that conversation, unless actually we reach across the divide, unless we say, actually, I don't believe that everybody is a thug. I think some people may be ignorant. And if we're not willing to go over and have that conversation with those people that are able to change their mind, then we sign ourselves away to this.
Yeah, get to know your neighbour, that's it. Get to know each other, get to know your neighbour, get into modern Britain. There's so much to benefit, so much we can learn from each other, so much we can actually absorb from each other. Get to know each other. And I think we're doing that to a large degree.
Yeah,
but I wonder as well about speaking the great British people, up. Yeah. These thugs don't speak or represent who Britain is, the people that showed up last night, the great British people.
Thank you very much indeed, both of you. Thank you.